I do some consulting work on American
feeling in the room was
You don't ever say to her that
What about the Chautauqua Institute?
Introductory discussion on the ethical implications of a community.
We're China took back over.
Currently doing in autism.
Pedro Noguera is an internationally renowned professor of education at New York University. He's the author of 7 books, including Creating the Opportunity to Learn and The Trouble with Black Boys, and other reflections on race, equity, and the future of public education. Noguera is also a regular commentator on educational issues for CNN and National Public Radio. We'll talk with him about education's most pressing problems, about why installing metal detectors isn't the answer, and about why we should assess schools the way we assess hospitals. Here's our conversation with Pedro Noguera. Pedro Noguera, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
The ultimate test of an educational system is whether every student, regardless of what their background is, learns what they need to compete in today's society. By that measure, just how are we doing in this country?
We're not doing very well at all. There's so many children who are not getting basic needs met and who are not being prepared either for work or for college, which means they're not going to be able to contribute to the society, and they'll probably end up a burden on society. And the sad thing is we do have good research and good techniques for serving all kinds of children. Autistic children, children with learning disabilities, children who don't speak English as their first language. I can cite schools that can serve all of those children well right now. But what we're not good at is disseminating that information and making it available to educators throughout the country.
In fact, I think you said there are something like 3,000 schools in this country where children are living in poverty that are high-achieving, high-performance schools.
That's right. The Education Trust has a website and publications on high-performing, high-poverty schools, and I've been to many of those schools. And even though they are the exception still, because we have many, many more schools than that, they are the proof that the poverty is not the problem. Not to say that we shouldn't be addressing poverty, we should, but we sometimes use poverty as an excuse for why we are not serving certain children. And that is really, it really shortchanges those children, and it contributes to many of the problems we have in our society. Undereducated people, poorly educated people, will not earn the same kinds of salaries in the labor market, will be more likely to end up in prison or in our criminal justice system. And it just hurts us in so many ways. So it really is in our interest, collective interest, to ensure that all children get educated well.
In fact, you say that the dilemma that's faced by black boys, especially Latino boys, is not just a problem for blacks and Latinos, not even just a problem for the United States, but it's a global problem.
It is a global problem. It's a global problem because increasingly we're seeing across the world males performing at much lower levels than females. Right now in the United States, in every state in the country, there are more women than men in college. And in some places, it's significantly more women than men. Now, there are many reasons for that. Some of it has to do with our labor market, the fact that many men leave high school and then go work. But it produces a serious problem in the labor market. It produces a lot of problem for women who are looking for men to marry and don't find
suitable mates.
But it also means that there's lots of men who are not going to be able to take care of a family and not be able to contribute again to the society. The problem is most acute amongst African American men, where we have a large and growing, well, not so much growing right now, but a large prison population. And what we've seen over the years, we have invested heavily in our prisons at the expense of education and health and roads and all the other things that we need. It's not cost effective, and it's not even making us safer. So it really is a policy that's working against our national interest.
I want to talk about policy in a minute, but you mentioned prisons, and 1/3 of all black males will spend some time in prison.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the family, but it's a tragedy for our society. Every dollar we spend on prison is a dollar we don't have for some other social need. We are spending sometimes 5, 6, 7 times as much to incarcerate an inmate as we do to educate a child. It is not cost effective. Right now, because of the burden of the prison population. We are seeing states like California and Texas that have been forced to start to release prisoners. But we're releasing people that have not received any training, that are not necessarily ready to be integrated in our society. And so that's not a strategy either. The strategy we should be investing in is early childhood education, in job training. These are the things that keep people out of prison, because people who are employed, people who have a stake and a reason to live, are less likely to commit crimes.
What conditions, based on your research and the time you actually spent in the classroom as a teacher, even once you became a professor, I think
Right.
you continued to teach part-time,
That's right.
but what conditions promote student achievement?
Well, they really are the basic conditions. We need schools that really encourage a child's curiosity and their interest in learning. I'll give you an example. I was at a school in Baltimore, and in Baltimore they've been trying to use science to drive the literacy curriculum, because we know that science is often the favorite subject of children, because children have so many questions about the world.
Why?
That's right. Why is it like this? So this teacher decided she's going to bring a hermit crab with her to class as a way to get children to write about their natural environment. Well, she brings the hermit crab, and the kids are immediately fixated on the crab. They have loads of questions because they've never seen a hermit crab, and if you've never seen one, they're very interesting creatures. And they want to know all kinds of things. Does it have children? Is it married? You know, what's its name? What does he eat? How did he get that house? And after several questions, now they're ready to write. And they're taking off. They're writing about, because they didn't even know that that same hermit crab lives in the harbor that they pass by every day. So there's a way in which, if we really focus on exciting kids about learning, if we focus on getting them interesting things to read, if we focus on really tapping into that innate curiosity that all human beings have to understand the world around them, we could create very different schools than we have right now. And we wouldn't have to force feed children to learn. We could get children to become invested as learners and more motivated.
When black males especially drop out, for example, they don't really drop out, they physically drop out in high school, but you say they drop out long before that.
That's
and
right.
it's partly because of the message they're receiving. You said that the trouble for black males begins at school, and in part because of how teachers do or do not relate to them.
Yeah, I want to maybe qualify that, because we have high infant mortality rates for black male children as well. So you could say it's even starting before school, right, with prenatal care and quality of early childhood nutrition and education children receive. But we would hope that school would be a place where children get support. And what we're seeing instead for black male students is that school is often a place where the trouble begins, right, where they're more likely to be disciplined. And we discipline children in a way that often reinforces the behavior problem, because we typically use humiliation as a strategy for punishment, or we use exclusion. We send children home to
Expel them, suspend them.
to go watch television, as if that were a discipline strategy. You know, Lawrence Kohlberg wrote many years ago that the goal of discipline is not to teach children to avoid punishment. The goal of discipline is to teach children to do what's right, even when we're not around. To do that, you have to focus on character. To do that, you have to keep kids engaged. Kids who are engaged, intellectually engaged, who are actively involved in learning, give you less trouble. So part of what we have to do is we have to change the way we are relating to these children. We have to help teachers learn how to relate and to build strong relationships with children. When a child can tell if he doesn't like them, a child can tell if you're afraid of them, a child can tell if you would rather that they weren't there. And unfortunately, we don't do a very good job of preparing our teachers to work with the wide gamut of students we serve. The good news is I could name several schools right now where black male students are thriving and excelling.
One of them,
again, proof that the problem is not the child, but the way we treat those children.
one of them, surprisingly, is Public School 28 in New York City, where 40% of the student population is homeless.
That's right.
What are they doing there that makes these kids know that they've got a real relationship with, and the teachers there and the support staff care about them?
Well, this is a school that has an extraordinary principal who's both resourceful but also visionary. So she really has developed a school that functions much more like a community center than a typical school. And she does that by building partnerships with local hospitals, with job training agencies, with the YMCA, so that her kids have after-school support. The parents get classes so they can pursue their high school equivalency degree, and the children themselves can get health services at the site. All of that makes it possible for the teachers to focus on the teaching, because the other needs of children, which would otherwise interfere with their ability to learn, are being addressed. And the teachers have lots of support in their classroom. I described going to visit classrooms, I see 4 and 5 adults in every classroom, because they're also training parents to work with teachers. And parents are contributing to the classroom. They're not trained to be teachers, but they can help individual students. Even if they can help the teacher to get copies made, they can do lots of things that make the teacher's job easier.
And their presence really shows how the parent values education, which makes me a little bit curious about your own education. You are one of 6, or one of 7.
6.
One of 6. Your parents were immigrants from the Caribbean. Right. Neither had high school educations, and yet all 6 of you graduated from very good colleges. But you have said that you succeeded in spite of your education, not because of it.
Yeah, I wasn't lucky enough to go to the kinds of schools I've been describing. I didn't attend schools where there was this enhanced learning environment. We went to regular public schools. Now, I have to be careful. I had, along the way, some very, very influential, effective teachers. Some. And that
sometimes
did make a
all it
difference.
takes is one.
That's right. I remember Mr. Weiss in 7th grade who got us to read Beowulf. I didn't want to have anything to do with Beowulf initially, but he knew how to use theater and drama as a way to bring Beowulf to life. So I did have a few good teachers along the way that made a big difference. But I have to attribute my success and that of my peers largely to our parents' influence. And this is what many people don't realize. Just because a parent doesn't have a formal education doesn't mean they don't care about their children or don't appreciate the importance of education. My parents certainly appreciate the importance of education. My father was not well educated, but well read. He was always reading. He used to tell us, you can get a free education from a library. And he made sure that we got library cards. So there's a lot parents can do, and we make a mistake in school by not building partnerships with parents and reaching out to parents and letting them know there's a lot they must do to support their own children.
You quote a lot in your work Stephen Peters, who wrote a book with the title, Do You Know Enough About Me to Teach Me?
Yeah.
And he encourages teachers to do just that. Talk with the parent, find out more about this child that you're spending 8 hours or 6 hours a day with.
Yeah, Stephen's been doing great work, particularly working with school leaders and helping them to understand the importance of school culture and the climate we create. Children learn best in an environment where there's respect, where there's safety, where there's supportive, nurturing relationships with the adults, where they know that the people that are there care about them. It sounds obvious, but I can tell you many schools where that's not what children believe, where children really get the message that they don't even care if I don't show up, or would prefer if I didn't show up. And the sad thing is this, because of the kind of approach we've taken in the last few years by judging schools by test scores, there are some schools that really do get it, that if I could get rid of certain kids that bring my scores down, my school would be better off.
No, you say we should assess schools the way we assess hospitals, and I know, and I want to find out why you say that, but I know that hospitals actually will move patients who are probably not going to make it. They often move them to another hospital so that their numbers look good.
It's true, and but I would say that if a hospital is if their conditions go down, we then ask the question, what do we need to do to bring this up to the standard, right? To make sure that even in the poorest neighborhoods, basic health standards are being met. That should be our approach to schools. When we see a school is not performing well, where children are not learning, our job, the job of the state and the federal government should be to go in and say, what does this school need? Does it need more support for the teachers? Does it need a new leader? Does it need better use of technology? What does the school need to do a better job? What we do now instead is we simply pressure the school. Improve or someone's going to get fired.
Pressure and humiliate.
And humiliate. And neither is an effective strategy for improving schools. We should be building capacity in schools by carefully analyzing strengths and weaknesses and helping the schools to address their weaknesses.
You were asked once what the Obama administration's biggest achievement was in education. And surprisingly, you said healthcare reform.
That's right.
Why healthcare reform?
Well, health is an educational issue. Sick children don't do well in school. If we could do more to ensure that we did preventive health for children, we would see outcomes improve for children. And hopefully, Obamacare, as we're calling it now, will lead to better health outcomes for children. But I also place the emphasis on health because so much of what they've done in education has not been effective and has not been good for schools. Judging schools, but what's even more insidious than that, using testing and assessment the way they do to judge teachers is really the wrong approach. And that's not because we don't want to test. We must test children to determine whether or not they are learning the material, are they making progress, are they prepared for college or for work. So assessment is important, but assessment is a tool. The real issue we should be focused on.
You said we use it as a weapon.
We use it as a weapon against teachers and schools. What we should use assessment for is to diagnose learning needs and to give that information back to the teacher and the parent and the child so we know exactly what we need to work on for that child. But the real emphasis of policy should be how do we deliver high quality instruction, good teaching in schools so that children are in fact receiving what they need to be successful. Our goal should be to create enhanced learning environments where kids are excited about learning. That's what we should be after, not trying to threaten people with test results.
You're not a big fan of No Child Left Behind, and whenever I think of No Child Left Behind, I think of something critics often say, and that is weighing the pig isn't going to make the pig weigh anymore.
That's right, that's right. And you know, I have to acknowledge though, No Child Behind did something important for us. It did require schools to look at the evidence, were children learning? And what's more, it requires schools to disaggregate the data. So we weren't just looking at the affluent children, we had to look at the poor children, we had to look at children of color, we had to look at children with learning disabilities. So in that respect, I think No Child Left Behind took us a step forward. However, the only evidence we look at now is the test result. And that is not a good enough indicator for what is happening in a school. We need to look beyond the test results to know whether or not good instruction is being provided, whether or not a learning environment has been created in those schools, whether or not parents are engaged. That's the kind of focus we haven't given to schools. And consequently, what we end up with is schools that are failing. And we're seeing now that the Obama administration in several cities are now using school closure as a strategy, closing them down. Well, schools play a vital role in many communities. That's a source of stability in many communities. So closing schools should be something we do at the last resort, not as an improvement strategy. Instead, we should be much smarter in figuring out what is wrong with the school and address the problem. And that's, to me, what's missing right now at the federal and the state level.
You're not a big fan of race to the top.
No.
What's wrong with it, and how do we create an assessment that is fair, that makes sense, that's sensible?
Yeah. Well, to get the Race for the Top funds, many states had to establish goals that are completely unrealistic, you know, as we did with No Child Behind. No Child Behind, we said that by 2014, all of our children would be at proficiency. Now we know that's not happening. Under Race for the Top, we had states that say they will close the achievement gap in 4 years. These, to me, setting unrealistic goals is as it doesn't get us where we need to be any more than using slogans to guide policy. And that's what we've been doing with No Child Behind and Race for the Top. We use instruments, for example, this idea of judging teachers by test scores. We know there's so many factors that can influence how well a child does on a test, a particular test. Was that child motivated? Did that child come to school prepared?
Does that child speak English?
Does that child speak English? There's so many things. Why would you think it's a good idea to judge a teacher's performance based on the student test scores? There's no research supporting this strategy. Now, where they're right is this. There should be evidence that children are learning. So let's focus on that. How do we make sure that there is evidence in schools that children are learning and that the teacher knows how to meet their learning needs? Well, that takes a different approach. That would take going into schools, observing teachers, asking teachers, do you have the support you need, giving them feedback. That's the kind of work we really need to do. And because we keep looking for a quick fix, we avoid the more challenging work of supporting our teachers and supporting our schools.
You say that we have normalized We accept without alarm, without surprise, that in most places around the country, more than 50% of black males don't graduate. And yet there are some states like North Carolina, Maryland, California, where graduation rates among that population is increasing. In New York and Florida, Illinois, it's not so great.
Right.
What do you think they're doing in those states that's working?
Well, in the states where you see movement in the right direction, a lot of it is simply because of focus. We decided we're going to prioritize this, and we're going to put resources into it. Now, New York City is doing that now, and we'll see in a few years if we start to see an improvement. Sometimes just by drawing attention to a problem, it's the first step in making a difference. But I think that what also concerns me is that very often when we try to fix problems like these, we don't fully understand the nature, the complexity behind the problem, and we only focus on one thing. And I would say that if we do that in the case of trying to find ways to change outcomes for African American males, that we won't recognize that the problem is bigger than that. It's not simply about their performance in school, it's also about what's happening outside of school, about peer influences, about what's happening at the home, about whether or not there's a job for that child. Does that child believe that in their future there's hope and there's opportunity, or are they becoming discouraged and fatalistic about their futures? So we have to think in a more comprehensive way about how to change outcomes for children of all kinds.
Part of that comes down to expectations, and you talked earlier, you used the word fear. Sometimes a prejudice, a teacher comes to the classroom with a prejudice against boys of color.
Yeah, well, that's why to be a teacher truly is a higher calling. Right? We have to make sure that only the very best people get to become our teachers. And that we haven't done that. And I mean, not best in terms of what college they went to, best in terms of best intentions, best in terms of best prepared.
What brings them into the field, right?
That's right. What do they really care about kids? I mean, these are the kinds of things we should be really looking at, particularly during those first few years when they're working to get tenure. We should make it harder to become a teacher, particularly a tenured teacher, and easier to stop being a teacher if you're not.
Easier to get rid of a teacher?
That's right, if you're not good at it,
competent.
and you clearly are not effective. But again, to me, many teachers would be better if they were in a better environment, if they were getting better support. You know, it's just like in sports. You know, you see some players on one team, they don't look like they're very good, and then you put them on another team with different leadership, different dynamic, and they perform at a higher level. Well, that's the way it works for teachers too. And so it's not fair to just judge teachers unless you really understand all the factors that contribute to their performance in the classroom.
You say that you are a pragmatic optimist. At the same time, you say that we may solve global warming before we figure out how to educate poor kids in poor communities.
Yeah. Well, I say we in this country, unfortunately, because we've been fixated, I think, on the wrong kinds of policies for too long now. I'm hoping that they will begin to cave in under their own weight. We'll start to see that No Child Left Behind, Race for the Top, the Common Core standards, these kinds of strategies are too narrow and don't really address the overall conditions within our schools and take us to where we need to be. So I'm hoping that the public will begin to really question our policymakers and our leaders who keep telling us if we just do this one thing, it's all going to work out. It's never that simple.
And often it's some technology.
That's right. But the reason why I remain optimistic, despite my pragmatism, which comes from having seen promise after promise and failure after failure, my optimism comes from also going to schools where I see great things happening and see teachers who are really doing extraordinary work with children, even under very difficult conditions. And I get to go to those places, and I get to see that, yes, even now, even as during times when schools are asked to do more and more with less in terms of resources, there are good things happening for children when there's a combination of strong teaching, good leadership, good parental involvement, and a culture that affirms learning. And those schools exist right now, and that gives me reason for optimism.
Not surprisingly, your own son, one of your own children, became a teacher.
That's right, and he's still working in education. Actually, he's going to go work on his PhD this year. And what's interesting about him is that he was a student in school who had trouble at one point. He had trouble because he was influenced by his peers, and many of his peers were not doing well. And even though he had lots of support at home, the peer group was undermining his focus in school. And it took me as a parent spending time with him, really trying to understand how he was seeing things to help him get through that period. I share that story with people because I want to acknowledge that being a parent is a challenge. You know, a lot of parents, even parents who are well educated and have resources, struggle with raising their children, which is why we should not be so quick to judge parents. Most parents want their children to succeed. I rarely meet parents who say, you know what, I would like my child to be unemployed and live with me for the rest of their life. You know, I don't meet too many parents who wish for that. But it doesn't mean they know how to help the child. And many parents are, in fact, doing things that contribute to the child's problems. They let them watch too much television or play too many video games. They don't have a structure at home. There's no bedtime. They don't make sure they get to work on time. They don't give them chores to do so that they learn a sense of responsibility.
Poor nutrition.
Poor nutrition. So I can go on. And unfortunately, all those things affect a child's development and affect whether or not that child is appreciating the importance of learning and coming to school ready to learn. So it's not good enough to only focus on what schools do. We've also got to remind parents they have a role and responsibility to help their children to be successful.
Pedro Noguera, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you. It's been great.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Pedro Noguera. Comcast subscribers can watch this program anytime on Penn State On Demand. Find out how through our website, conversations.psu.edu, where you'll also find more video from this interview. I'm Patty Satalia. We hope you'll join us for our next Conversation from Penn State.
Production funding provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you. This has been a production of WPSU.